It was a peaceful morning when Luna the dog found herself in a situation no one could have predicted. The sun had risen brightly, casting golden beams over the forest. The world was calm, the air was fresh, and Luna, with her 5 playful puppies, was enjoying the serenity of the woods she called home. The pups were still small, their eyes barely open, relying on their mother for warmth and guidance. Luna had always been a vigilant and protective mother, watching over her little ones with the kind of love that only a mother could understand. For days, she had led them through the forest, teaching them how to explore and safely navigate the underbrush. She had always felt secure here in the forest, where the trees provided a blanket of protection and the streams offered a steady supply of water. Her puppies had grown strong in the comforting embrace of their forest home. It was a place where Luna had forged an unshakable bond with her pups, and in return, they had learned to trust her with their very lives. But in an instant, everything changed. A distant crackling sound broke the silence, a low rumble that seemed out of place. Luna's ears perked up, her senses sharpening as she immediately recognized the source of the sound, the unmistakable crackle of fire. Her heart skipped a beat. It started off as a distant flicker of flame, hardly noticeable from where she stood, but Luna knew better than to dismiss it. A fire in the forest could spread quickly, fueled by the dry underbrush and the towering trees. Before long, the fire could swallow everything in its path, and there would be no place to hide. Luna's instincts kicked in immediately. She stood still for a moment, assessing the situation. The wind, which had been blowing softly a moment ago, began to pick up. She could feel the heat from the fire, even from this far away. The air began to thicken with smoke, and the once crisp, fresh scent of the forest was replaced with the acrid smell of burning wood. Luna didn't need to see the fire to know how dangerous it was. The wind was pushing the flames toward them, faster than she could have ever anticipated. Without hesitation, she turned toward her puppies, who were now playing in the soft grass, unaware of the looming danger. Their small, innocent faces were turned upward toward their mother, and Luna's heart swelled with love as she caught a glimpse of their trusting eyes. But there was no time to savor that moment. Her protective instincts flared, and with a low growl, Luna called out to her puppies, "Move now!" She barked, her voice firm but filled with urgency. The puppies, startled by the change in tone, quickly looked up at their mother. Luna's eyes were wide with fear, but they were also filled with determination. There was no time to explain, no time to comfort them with reassurances. The fire was coming, and the only thing that mattered now was getting out of the forest and finding safety. The puppies, still small and inexperienced, hesitated for only a moment before scrambling to their feet. They followed Luna without question, the bond of trust between them evident as they moved quickly behind her. But the terrain was difficult, the underbrush thick and tangled, and the pups were still learning how to navigate the world around them. Luna could hear their tiny feet stumbling behind her, and with every step her heart ached. She couldn't afford to lose any of them. The smoke thickened, and Luna's lungs began to burn with each breath. She could feel the heat of the flames growing stronger, pressing against her from all sides. The trees, once her shelter, were now a deadly obstacle, their branches cracking and creaking under the stress of the fire. Luna's eyes watered, but she refused to stop. She pushed forward, leading her puppies through the dense forest, urging them to keep up as she tried to make her way toward a clearing in the distance. She could see the faint outline of the clearing now, the promise of open space and safety just ahead. But the fire was faster than she had anticipated. The flames, one small flicker on the horizon, had now grown into a massive inferno. They consumed everything in their path, trees, bushes, and animals alike, leaving nothing but destruction in their wake. Luna could hear the crackling and roaring of the fire as it grew closer, and she knew that time was running out. As they neared the clearing, Luna realized that the path she had been following was now blocked by a fallen tree. The fire was fast approaching, and there was no time to find another route. The tree had collapsed under the intense heat, its branches twisting and burning as the flames reached it. Luna's heart raced as she turned to her puppies, who were now starting to lag behind, struggling to keep up in the thick smoke and oppressive heat. "Keep moving," Luna urged, her voice firm but filled with desperation. She couldn't afford to lose them now. She had to be strong for them. She wasn't just fighting for her own survival anymore, she was fighting for their lives. Luna knew that the only way to survive was to keep moving forward. There was no time to think about what might happen if they didn't make it. She had to push forward no matter how difficult it was. She had to find safety. She could see the clearing now, just beyond the tree line. But the fire was closing in, and Luna knew they wouldn't make it if they didn't hurry. Her heart raced as she darted around the fallen tree, her body moving faster than she thought possible. The puppies followed her closely, but their steps were slower, their tiny bodies growing fatigued. Luna could see their exhaustion in their faces, but she didn't stop. She couldn't stop. With every step, Luna felt the fire getting closer, the heat growing more unbearable. The trees around her began to burn, and the once familiar sounds of the forest were drowned out by the roar of the fire. The sky, once a soft blue, was now an angry shade of orange, the sun obscured by the smoke. Luna's paws burned as she raced forward, the ground beneath her scorching hot from the spreading flames. But she didn't stop. She couldn't. Luna's mind raced, her thoughts focused solely on one thing, her puppies. She could feel their fear, their exhaustion, their uncertainty. They were too young to understand the full extent of the danger, but they trusted her completely. She had to get them to safety. She had to protect them. The clearing was so close now. Luna could almost taste the air that wasn't filled with smoke. But even as they neared it, the fire was almost upon them. The flames were so close she could feel the intense heat radiating toward her, the crackling of burning trees echoing in her ears. She couldn't stop, not now. Her puppies were depending on her. They had to make it out. With one final burst of energy, Luna raced forward, her heart pounding in her chest. She could see the edge of the clearing now, a small patch of open land that promised safety. But there was still a matter of the ravine that separated them from it. The ravine was deep and wide, the ground on the other side rocky and treacherous. Luna's heart sank as she realized the only way forward was across the ravine. The fire was coming, and there was no time to find another way around. Her mind raced. How could she possibly get across? The ravine seemed impossible to cross, but there was no other choice. The fire was almost upon them, and there was no time to waste. Luna urged her puppies forward, her voice filled with urgency as she led them toward the edge of the ravine. She could feel the flames at her back, the heat almost unbearable now. Luna took a deep breath and looked at her puppies one last time. She had to get them across. There was no other option. The fire was closing in. The ravine was their only chance. The fire behind them raged on, its heat pressing relentlessly against Luna's fur, threatening to consume everything she loved. Her paws ached, and her breathing grew shallow as she urged puppies onward. They were tired, their little legs struggling to keep up with her, but Luna wouldn't let them stop. They couldn't afford to rest, not when the flames were so close, licking at the trees and devouring everything in their path. Luna's heart was pounding in her chest, but she remained resolute. Her puppies, small and fragile, were lagging behind now, their pace slow and unsteady. The fire had stolen their strength, draining their energy with every passing minute. Luna glanced back at them, her eyes filled with both concern and determination. She could see their tiny bodies trembling, the weight of the journey taking its toll on their little hearts and legs. But they were survivors just like her, and Luna would do whatever it took to make sure they reached safety. With every step, the smoke grew thicker, the air heavier, making it harder to breathe. Luna could feel the stinging burn in her eyes as the smoke clouded her vision, but she refused to stop. There was no time for weakness. She had to keep moving, keep pushing them forward. She couldn't afford to let the fire catch up. She had to get them across the ravine and into the clearing beyond. Her ears perked up as she heard the distant crackling of fire, the sound growing louder with every passing second. The trees around them groaned and splintered as the fire devoured them, sending huge plumes of smoke into the sky. The ground beneath Luna's paws was growing hotter by the second, and her fur felt as though it was being singed by the intense heat. The flames were close now, too close. She looked back at her puppies again. They were struggling, their little bodies swaying with exhaustion. Their steps had slowed to a crawl, and Luna could see that their energy was nearly spent. One of her pups stumbled, tripping over a rock, and fell to the ground. Luna's heart skipped a beat as she rushed to her side, nuzzling her gently with her nose. "Get up," she urged, her voice soft but firm. "We have to keep going. You're strong, you can do this." The pup looked up at her with tired eyes, confusion and fear evident on her little face. She was so young, so innocent, and Luna could see the terror in her eyes. The fire was too big, too powerful for her to understand, but she trusted her mother with everything she had. Luna licked her puppy's face, offering a silent promise, "I will not let you down. I will keep you safe." With a shaky breath, the pup struggled through her feet, and Luna guided her forward. The other puppies followed closely behind, their steps slow but steady. Luna's heart swelled with pride as she led them through the thickening smoke, every step they took bringing them closer to the clearing. And they were going to make it, they had to, but as they neared the edge of the ravine, Luna realized the extent of the danger they were in. The fire had spread so quickly that it had reached the other side of the ravine, the flames licking at the trees there as well. Luna could see the orange glow of the fire, reflected in the darkened sky. The ravine was their only way forward, and it was now blocked by the very thing they had been trying to escape. Panic surged in Luna's chest, but she fought to keep it down. She couldn't afford to panic. Not now. Not when her puppies were relying on her. She scanned the ravine, searching for any way across. There was no bridge, no easy path. The sides of the ravine were steep, rocky, and treacherous. One wrong move, and they could slip and fall to their deaths. Luna's mind raced as she tried to come up with a plan. She could feel the fire closing in behind them, the heat unbearable now. The crackling of the flames was deafening, and Luna knew they didn't have much time left. The wind was shifting, pushing the flames in their direction, and the smoke was so thick that she could barely see. She turned to look at her puppies, who were huddled together in fear. Their little bodies were trembling, and Luna could see the confusion in their eyes. They were too young to understand the danger they were in, but they trusted their mother completely. Luna's heart ached as she watched them, and she knew she couldn't let them down. With a deep breath, Luna steeled herself. There was no other choice. She had to figure out how to get across the ravine, no matter what it took. She could hear the sound of the fire crackling ever closer, and the scent of smoke was overwhelming. She had to act quickly. Luna scanned the area, her keen eyes searching for any signs of a path across the ravine. Her gaze fell on a large boulder near the edge of the ravine. It was large enough to provide some leverage, but it was too far to reach from where they stood. The gap was wide, the distance between the boulder and the other side of the ravine too great for them to leap. Luna's heart sank. She knew that they were running out of time, and every second that passed made their chances of survival slimmer. But Luna didn't give up. She wasn't going to let the fire take her family. She wasn't going to let it take her puppies. She turned to them, her voice calm but filled with urgency. "Stay close," she commanded. "Follow me, I'll get us across." The puppies, though terrified, nodded and moved closer to her, seeking comfort in her presence. Luna could feel the warmth of their little bodies against her as they huddled together, ready to follow her lead. With one last look at the boulder, Luna made her decision. She was going to climb. The ravine was steep, but it wasn't impossible. She could make it. With a determined growl, Luna began to scale the rocky side of the ravine, using her strong paws to grip the jagged edges of the stone. The heat from the fire was overwhelming, but she pushed through it, focusing on the task at hand. She couldn't afford to stop, not now. As she climbed higher, the smoke grew thicker, and the air felt like it was closing in around her. But Luna didn't falter. Her body ached from the exertion, her muscles burning with every movement, but she kept going. The fire was still creeping closer, and she could hear the roar of the flames behind her. She could feel the heat searing her fur, but she couldn't let it distract her. She had to get to the other side. Luna's heart was pounding in her chest as she reached the top of the ravine. She turned to look back at her puppies, who were struggling to follow her. They were frightened, their little paws slipping on the rocky surface, and Luna's heart ached with every step they took. She couldn't let them fall. "Not now. Come on," she called softly, her voice filled with encouragement. "You're almost there. Keep going." The puppies, though tired, managed to make their way up the rocky incline, their small bodies pushing through the pain. Luna watched them carefully, her eyes never leaving them as they made their way up to the top. They had made it this far, they could do it. Finally, with one last push, Luna's puppies reached the top of the ravine. They were exhausted, their little legs shaking from the climb, but they were safe for now. Luna pulled them close, nuzzling each one with her nose as they huddled together, grateful for the moment of peace. But even as they caught their breath, Luna knew the fire wasn't far behind. They had escaped one danger, but they were still far from out of the woods. The fire was coming, and it was only a matter of time before they would have to run again. But for now, Luna allowed herself a brief moment of relief. She had gotten them across the ravine. They had survived. And that was all that mattered. Luna stood at the edge of the ravine, her heart racing and her breath shallow. She looked back at her puppies, who were still huddled together, their tiny bodies trembling with exhaustion. The fire had pushed them to their limits, and now, on the edge of this steep ravine, they found themselves in a brief moment of respite. Luna knew, however, that this was only temporary. The fire was not done with them yet. The wind had shifted again, sending a wave of heat toward the ravine, and the distant crackling of the flames served as a constant reminder of the urgency of their situation. Time was running out, and Luna knew they had to move again. The clearing she had seen in the distance was still there, just within reach, but getting there now felt like an impossible task. The ravine had been the first major obstacle, and although they had managed to overcome it, the terrain was unforgiving. The steep sides they had climbed to reach the top left them vulnerable, exposed to the elements and the ever-encroaching fire. The space before them was no longer the welcoming haven it had seemed. It now looked like a final stretch of open land that stood between them and the fire. The flames were chasing them, pushing them forward with relentless fury, but the clearing still held the promise of safety, of something better. Luna turned to face her puppies, her eyes soft but filled with determination. They were tired, so very tired. She could see the weariness in their faces, the way their steps had slowed, their once energetic little bodies dragging in the oppressive heat and thick smoke. Luna had led them through so much already, through the smoke, through the underbrush, and over the treacherous ravine. She had felt their fear as she pushed them onward, their uncertainty palpable in every hesitant step they took. But they trusted her. They had always trusted her. And in this moment, Luna knew she couldn't afford to let them down. Not now, not ever. Keep moving, Luna urged softly, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. She could see the confusion in their eyes, the questioning look as they gazed at her, wondering what was next. They couldn't understand the full scope of what was happening, but they knew enough to follow her lead. They had no choice. With a final look back at the fire, Luna took a step forward, her paws crunching against the dry, scorched earth beneath her. The ground was hard and cracked, the heat radiating from it nearly unbearable, but she pressed on. Her puppies followed her closely, their tiny bodies moving in sync with hers. They were all she had left. And with each step, Luna could feel the weight of responsibility pushing her forward. The fire was getting closer, but the clearing was still just ahead. The wind shifted again, this time bringing with it an even more intense wave of heat, and Luna's fur felt as though it was being singed by the intensity of the flames behind them. Her lungs burned from the thick smoke, but there was no time to slow down. They couldn't afford to stop. She had no idea how much longer they could keep going, how much farther they had to go before the fire caught up with them. But she knew one thing for sure: they weren't going to make it if they didn't keep moving. Luna glanced behind her, her eyes scanning the path they had just crossed. The fire was so close now. She could feel the heat of it on her fur, hear the roar of it as it devoured the trees and ground around them. The sky had turned an ominous shade of red, the smoke choking out the sunlight, and the air was thick with the scent of burning wood and scorched earth. Luna's throat tightened as she pushed forward, each step a battle against the growing fear in her chest. She could hear the crackling of the fire growing louder with every passing second, the flames devouring everything in their path. Her heart thudded in her chest as she reached the edge of the clearing. It wasn't large, but it was open, and that meant it could offer them a chance to escape. There were no trees to block their way, no obstacles that could impede their progress. But the fire was closing in fast, its heat radiating from behind them like a living, breathing beast. Luna knew that they had to make it to the clearing before the flames reached them. There was no other way. They had to outrun the fire or they would be trapped. Stay close, Luna said, her voice firm yet filled with a sense of urgency. The puppies, though weary, kept pace with her, their tiny paws scrambling to follow her every movement. Luna kept her gaze focused on the clearing ahead, ignoring the heat that pressed in on her from all sides. Her thoughts were a blur, racing faster than her paws could carry her. She had to keep moving. They had to keep moving. The ground beneath them seemed to shift with every step, as if the earth itself was trembling in fear of the fire. Luna's paws burned with every stride, but she kept pushing herself forward. She could feel her body growing weaker, the exhaustion starting to take its toll, but the sight of her puppies behind her gave her the strength she needed to keep going. They were still following her, still trusting her to lead them out of this nightmare. She couldn't stop, not now, not when they were so close. The clearing was just ahead now, and Luna could see the shapes of other animals gathering there, their eyes wide with fear and uncertainty. They were survivors just like her, each one seeking refuge from the fire. Luna didn't stop to question how they had gotten there or who they were. The only thing that mattered was getting her puppies to safety. The fire was still chasing them, the heat growing more intense with every second. The smoke was so thick now that it was hard to see, but Luna pushed through, focusing on the goal ahead. She could hear the distant crackling of the fire growing louder, feel the searing heat on her fur. It was too close. They were running out of time. Luna urged her puppies to move faster, her voice encouraging and calm, despite the panic rising in her chest. They were almost there. They had to be. Each step felt like it took everything she had, but she kept going, determined to reach the safety of the clearing. She didn't have the luxury of slowing down or resting. The fire was too close, too fast, and there was no time to waste. The puppies, though weary and exhausted, managed to keep up. Their little bodies were shaking with fatigue, but they followed Luna's lead, trusting her completely. Luna could see the fear in their eyes, the confusion, but they didn't stop. They kept moving forward just as she had taught them to do. Finally, they reached the edge of the clearing, and Luna didn't hesitate. She rushed forward, urging her puppies to follow her into the open space. The other animals in the clearing looked at them with wide eyes, but Luna didn't stop to exchange words. She needed to get her puppies into the safety of the open land, away from the flames. As they entered the clearing, Luna let out a sigh of relief, though she knew it wasn't over yet. The fire was still too close, the heat too intense. But for now, they had made it. They had outrun the fire, at least for a moment. The animals in the clearing gathered together, some frightened, some injured, all seeking the same thing, safety. Luna's puppies collapsed onto the ground, their little bodies spent from the journey. Luna nuzzled them gently, her eyes filled with a mixture of pride and exhaustion. They had made it. They were safe for now. Luna looked around, her eyes scanning the other animals in the clearing. There were a few deer, some birds, and even a few smaller creatures that had managed to escape the flames. They were all in the same situation, all survivors of the fire that had ravaged their homes. Luna felt a sense of solidarity with them, even though they had come from different parts of the forest. They had all faced the same danger, and now they were here together trying to find safety. But Luna knew that the fire wasn't done yet. The flames were still spreading, and there was no guarantee that the clearing would remain safe for long. The wind could shift again, the flames could move in their direction. The danger wasn't over. For now, though, Luna allowed herself a moment of peace. Her puppies were safe, they had made it through the worst of it. And they had each other. That was all that mattered. The fire had chased them, threatened to take everything from them, but Luna had refused to give up. She had fought with every ounce of strength she had to protect her puppies, and in the end, that fight had brought them here, to safety. And though the battle wasn't over, Luna knew that as long as they were together, they could face whatever came next. They were survivors. Together they could overcome anything. The fire had reached the edge of the clearing now, and though Luna had managed to get her puppies to safety, the battle was far from over. The smoke, thick and suffocating, hung in the air like a shroud, and the crackling of the flames continued to echo in the distance. Luna's body was exhausted, her muscles aching from the relentless journey through the forest, the climb up the ravine, and the unyielding effort to protect her puppies. She could feel the heat of the fire on her fur, the searing warmth, a constant reminder of how close they had come to losing everything. As Luna huddled with her puppies in the center of the clearing, she could see the other animals gathered around, each one looking just as tired, just as frightened as she felt. They were all survivors drawn together by the fire that had ravaged their homes. There were deer, rabbits, squirrels, and even birds perched on the edges of the clearing, all seeking the same refuge from the storm of flames that had torn through the forest. Their eyes were filled with fear, their bodies tense as they looked toward the fire, knowing that the danger was far from over. Luna's mind raced as she scanned the area, her instincts alert as always. The wind was shifting again, and she could see the smoke rising higher in the air, thick and heavy. The fire was unpredictable, and though they had found temporary safety in the clearing, Luna knew they couldn't stay here for long. The fire had been moving too quickly, spreading with a force they couldn't outrun. It was only a matter of time before it reached them, and the clearing, though wide and open, wouldn't be enough to keep them safe. Her puppies, exhausted from the ordeal, had settled down on the ground, their tiny bodies curled together for warmth and comfort. Luna watched over them, her eyes never straying far from the fire. She could feel their weariness in her own bones, their exhaustion matching hers. They had been through so much already, through the smoke, the ravine, and the fire itself, and yet they had made it this far. They had survived. Luna felt a swell of pride in her chest, but there was no time to celebrate. The fire was still coming, and she knew she had to be ready to act when the time came. The other animals in the clearing were also starting to show signs of distress. Some of them were pacing nervously, others were huddling together for comfort, their eyes wide with fear. Luna could feel the tension in the air, the shared understanding that they were all in this together. Yet no one knew what the next moment would bring. The fire had consumed so much already, so many trees, so many homes, and there was no telling where it would go next. Luna glanced at her puppies once more, her gaze softening as she watched them rest. They were so young, so innocent, and she couldn't help but feel a deep sense of responsibility for them. She had led them through the forest, through the smoke and the flames, but now, in the safety of the clearing, she could finally allow herself a moment of relief. They were safe for now, and that was enough, but it was still too early to let her guard down. The fire was unpredictable, and Luna knew that even the slightest change in the wind could bring the flames back in their direction. She took a deep breath, her chest tight from the smoke, and turned her attention back to the fire. The flames were still distant, but the air was thick with heat, and the crackling sound of the burning forest was deafening. It was as though the world itself was being consumed by the fire, the once lush trees now reduced to charred remains. Luna's heart sank as she realized just how much had been lost, how much of the forest had already been destroyed. The clearing, though safe for the moment, was not an impenetrable barrier against the fire. Luna knew that if the flames reached them, there would be no place to run, no place to hide. She had already lost too much today. She couldn't afford to lose her puppies, her family, and everything she had fought to protect. It was time to think ahead, to figure out what their next move would be. Luna's gaze shifted to the edge of the clearing. There was a small, narrow path leading out of the open area, winding through the forest toward a distant hill. It wasn't much, but it was a potential escape route, a way out if the fire drew closer. She could see a faint outline of trees on the horizon, a part of the forest that had not yet been touched by the flames. The path, though narrow and overgrown, might lead them to safety away from the danger of the fire. Luna's heart pounded in her chest as she considered the possibility. The path wasn't a guaranteed escape. It might lead them into more danger, or it could be blocked by fallen trees or other obstacles. But staying in the clearing wasn't an option either. The fire was closing in, and the air was becoming unbearable. The heat from the flames was pushing them farther and farther into the open space, and Luna knew they needed to move before it was too late. With a soft growl of determination, Luna rose to her feet, her body aching with every movement. She turned to her puppies, who had begun to stir as they sensed her rise. Their little faces were tired but hopeful, and Luna could see the trust in their eyes. They had followed her this far, and now, as the flames continued to rage in the distance, she knew they would follow her again. "Listen to me, little ones," Luna said, her voice calm but firm. "We need to move." The fire is still coming, and we can't stay here. Her puppies looked up at her, their eyes wide with a mix of fear and trust. They had been through so much already, and Luna knew they were tired, but there was no time to rest. She could feel the urgency in her chest, the weight of responsibility that pressed on her shoulders. The time had come to leave the clearing behind and make their way to the hill in the distance. It wasn't a guarantee of safety, but it was their best chance. The other animals in the clearing looked to Luna as she began to move toward the narrow path. There were a few who hesitated, uncertain of whether to follow her lead. Some were too scared to leave the relative safety of the open space, while others looked to Luna for guidance, waiting for her to make the first move. Luna didn't wait for anyone. She had made up her mind. They needed to leave the clearing now. Her puppies, though exhausted, began to follow her as she moved toward the path. The ground was uneven and treacherous, but Luna pushed on, the fire still at her back, the heat rising with every step. Her paws burned from the hot earth, but she didn't stop. Her puppies were close behind her, their tiny bodies struggling to keep up with her pace. But Luna urged them on. "Stay close," she whispered. Her voice steady but filled with urgency. "We'll make it. We just have to keep moving." As they moved farther from the clearing, Luna glanced back one last time. The fire was still there, still raging in the distance, but the smoke had begun to clear in the path ahead. The wind was shifting, and for the first time since the fire had started, Luna felt a glimmer of hope. They weren't out of danger yet, but they were moving toward safety, toward a chance for survival. The path was narrow, but it led them through the forest, past the blackened trees and scorched earth, toward the distant hill that I had seen earlier. The air was still thick with smoke, but it was less oppressive here, the heat less suffocating. They were moving toward the unknown, but Luna felt a renewed sense of purpose. They were alive. They had made it through the worst of it. Her heart swelled with pride as she looked at her puppies, their faces determined despite their weariness. They were still following her, still trusting her to lead them. Luna couldn't help but marvel at their strength, their resilience. They had been through so much already, but they were still fighting, still surviving. Luna pushed forward, her paws steady as she led her puppies down the path. The fire was far behind them now, but Luna knew better than to take anything for granted. They couldn't stop. Not yet. The hill in the distance grew closer, the path growing steeper as they climbed toward the top. Luna's body ached, but her spirit was unbroken. They were survivors, and as long as they had each other, they would keep fighting. Together, they could face whatever challenges lay ahead. Together, they would make it out of this alive. Luna didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in what felt like forever, she allowed herself to believe in it. The fire may have taken so much from them, but it hadn't taken their will to survive. And as long as they had that, Luna knew they could make it through anything. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more incredible stories of strength and survival.